Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Deborah Scott, and I'm the Associate Director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center, the main organization offering the symposium. I also serve as one of the co-leads of the RCE Greater Atlanta Higher Education Learning Community, who organize this wonderful panel. I will turn it over to our moderator in a minute. But before I do that, I would like to share some housekeeping notes. This session is recorded and we will also make it available on our YouTube channel soon, and I will put the link to the YouTube channel. Please keep your audio and video off, and you can always use the chat and Q&A functions for your questions and comments. You can also raise your hand and we would call on you to unmute. We would also invite you to put your name, email, institution, organization into the chat box so that we know who is in the room, who's in our virtual room, because hopefully this conversation, this roundtable will also serve as a networking opportunity. We will end promptly at 2:30, maybe even a bit sooner if we can, because at 2:35 our youth panel, RCE youth panel will start. So we need to switch to that, and I will put the link, the Zoom link for you to join the youth panel at 2:35 as well. I think I'm gonna stop there, and I just want to welcome you all again and turn it over to our wonderful moderator, Mina. Thank you, Mina, so much for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us today and moderate this exciting panel. And Mina is Associate Professor of Architecture at Kennesaw State University. So Mina, the mic is yours. I think we can take off the welcoming slide so that we can see our panelists and they can share their screen if they need to. Again, welcome everybody.
Great, thank you, Shebnam. Welcome everyone. It's great to see all the panelists here, so many old friends and faces. I will introduce our panelists, but when they introduce their projects and institution and work, they're welcome to add some specifics about themselves as well. We have Ebony Preston, Director of Operations in Greening Youth Foundation. There's Ebony, I guess, there. We see Ebony. Okay. And then we have Judy, Director of Outreach and Marketing at Trees Atlanta. We have Debra Scott from Georgia Stand Up. She's the Executive Director. JD Kim, Executive Director of Regeneration. And Michael Elliott, Professor of Planning at Georgia Tech, and he's the representative of Mahila Housing Project. So I would like to start our panel by asking each panelist to talk about the kinds of partnerships they have developed in recent years, and how they are involved in this, what are the roles of the partners, what is the project. If you could actually use 5 minutes to talk about each, that would be great. And I'd like to go through my list in front of me. Can we start with Ebony?
Sure, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. Super excited, and some rock stars that are being represented this morning. So I'm honored to be here with you all. But I guess I should say afternoon. Sorry about that. But yeah, so I am with the Greening Youth Foundation. We are based here in Atlanta, Georgia, but we are fortunate enough to have national programming with a mission of engaging diverse youth that are underrepresented and underserved in the environment. And so our work and our efforts are to connect these young people with conservation, with those efforts, but specifically with jobs. And so we do that through a lot of stewardship programming, a lot of workforce development programming. And so that certainly has taken the tone of the projects that we've had in our relationship. And so looking specifically at two parts of the work that we do, we have a 3.5 acre farm in the west end of Atlanta. And so wanting to draw attraction there and getting more youth outside, getting their families outside, really making this a resource to the community. And so our focus was there. And then just again, with these younger students, uplifting the importance of being an environmental steward and knowing about nutrition and wellness and things like recycling and composting, so they could take those values with them as they, matriculated through school, as they continue to learn, and just practice good things like that at home with their families and with their community. So we've had a number of projects over the years with the university and with the partnership. And again, it's all to really facilitate this conversation around environmental stewardship. And I'll certainly show you a couple of examples in a second, but just kind of wanted to lay those out. So one big one, which was developing a digital platform for urban agriculture that focused on education and environmental stewardship that could be used by our staff to interact with visitors in the space. So that's taking them to the farm, having them explore, really understand what's there, what that looks like, how they can engage. So if staff is leading something, they now have something on their device, whether it's a tablet or phone, maybe we even print it out, but they can know what's there. So if they want to walk around on their own, like I said, it's 3.5 acres. They don't want to be, tied to someone the entire time, but they can really explore it freely and understand what's happening and be empowered in that space. We thought that was really, really important. We also had another group develop specific tools to support the educational and community programming at the farm. So we wanted to be more of just an exploration of what's going on there, but for us to have intentional programming. So understanding what animal husbandry is, understanding what urban agriculture and horticulture and silviculture, what all of those things are. We also have a hoop house at the farm, understanding the purpose behind it and what's growing there and why there's a need for that, especially in Georgia as it gets so hot. So what's the importance of having that hoop house and making that a resource in the community garden? So again, we can be intentional about that time and the resources that folks are spending or putting out for the farm. We also talked about a digital and interactive map and worked through what that could look like so that people could know what was there before they even got there. So we're always inviting guests to the farm so that they can explore. So maybe I'm in South Georgia, or maybe I'm in California or Mississippi or New York, whatever that looks like, and I'm planning my trip. I've got onto this session. I'm like, the next time I go to Georgia, I want to make a plan and I want to go to the farm. So having a tool or resource, whether that be the website or some external site, be to say, hey, this is what all of that work looks like, and this is what I can kind of plan for, or this is something that I could maybe mimic and bring to whatever program or site or thing that I'm having local to me. So that's been a really, really good thing. And then finally, one big project that I so appreciated, as I said before, we do a lot of work in workforce development. That's probably the bread and butter of our organization in creating these opportunities for young people. So we found it really important to go beyond social media, so your Facebook and your Instagram, but finding ways to elevate those youth voices, those participant voices. And so they went to create a bigger blog and taking it a bit step further to really show what that looks like. And so just giving voice, showing a lot of images, being intentional, making sure that it's a lot of information that is relevant, that is timely, but again, representative of what it is that the youth are doing. And so just creating that space for them. And I know that we're short on time, so I'll just show one of the main ones that I think is really, really cool here, but this is what the ForeverGreen website, so this is more so about that environmental education programming and what that could look like. And as you can see through the partnership, we were really able to figure out what were the audiences we were addressing, what type of content it is that they needed, knowing that it's important that we meet students where they are and helping to understand and grasp these concepts a little bit more. And so just taking the time to connect with them and see what it is that they needed and making sure that we're putting it in the language in a way that would be accessible to our audiences.
Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you.
This looked really nice, a lot of partnerships. And then the next we have Judy from Trees Atlanta.
Guess it's that proverbial you're on mute. So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here also. I'll start off with an overview of our organization. And as far as partnership goes, you'll see throughout my presentation that every single part of our organization is dependent and enriched by our partnership. And I hope that we have time for a lot of conversation and questions, because I can bring some of those to life with specific questions. But let's start first with an overview of who we are. Trees Atlanta is an organization that was formed in 1986. And since then, 85 actually, and since then, we have worked on our mission that has never changed, which is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forests by planting, conserving, and educating. So many of us think about trees, and we think that trees is something that has been here for hundreds of years, and these forests are forever. But one of the things that our organization wants to educate and remind people is that in Georgia, we're so lucky being in a temperate climate that trees are a part of that history, but trees don't take generations to grow. For example, this image on the left is Spring Street in downtown Atlanta. The image on the right are trees that we planted, probably no less than 8 or 9 years old. Another image of Freedom Parkway. On the left, you see Freedom Parkway when it was first when it was constructed earlier on. It had no trees on that parkway, and you can see here dozens of volunteers helping us to plant young trees that today are much bigger than the images that you see on the right. Again, another familiar site in Atlanta. This is, for those of you who know this famous bar and restaurant, Manuel's Tavern in Ponce Highlands, used to not have canopy until Trees Atlanta worked with the city to figure out a way to cut out those wide sidewalks and add trees. The continuation of this story is, if you've been by this road, these trees are no longer there. It's part of the cycle of living in a city, and we'll talk about that in more in a little bit. This is also Atlanta. This is iconic downtown. The reason that Trees Atlanta began in 1985 was when the city started to boom in the 70s, the architects did not think about canopy downtown. If you look at archival photos of downtown Atlanta, it would be very hard for you to find a tree. So our organization, along with partners, the Junior League and CAP from downtown, got together and figured out, how do we make canopy part of the downtown landscape? And that really was the genesis of our organization. In that first year, Trees Atlanta planted 46 trees. In that time, we've now planted about 7,000 trees a year. And to date, we have about 140,000 trees planted in Metro Atlanta. We do this with volunteers. Every year, over 6,000 volunteers come with us and work with us. And even during COVID, we had thousands of volunteers who came out last year and continue to plant and care for trees during that time. Of course, we use physical distancing and masking protocol. This is also Atlanta. It feels like, how can this be the city, an urban city like City of Atlanta? But this is Lake Charlotte, a newly acquired nature preserve in South Atlanta. The City of Atlanta was able to buy 215 acres in South Atlanta, and this will soon become a park for that community. This is also Atlanta. This is Proctor Creek on the west side. It is stunning, and I hope if you haven't explored this area, you take time to explore the creek and the Greenway Trail. Trees Atlanta is involved in helping to do forest restoration in this area, as are many other organizations, such as one of our partners, Wawa. So in these programming, we have 3 major areas, as I indicated: planting, conserving, and educating. I won't go over these in depth, but I hope you take time to visit our website at treesatlanta.org and learn how you can come out and start planting with us in communities, or even get a free front yard tree for your yard. You can get one by asking us. The link is on our website. We also do forest restoration, because it's not only planting trees, but making sure that the land is preserved and the ecological balance is restored. Third is educating. We have programs both for youth and adults. We're in over 60 schools throughout Metro Atlanta. We also have a teen job training program in the summer called the Youth Tree Team. And like Ebony said, we know that there's a gap in who is entering into the conservation industries in all breadth, whether you're a landscape architect or you are a arborist or everything in between. And we teach these teens in a paid summer job program to come learn about new other green collar careers. And we have a robust adult education programming, and we're able to reach about 22,000 people each year through our education programming. And lastly, we have expanded into advocacy because we understand that many times it's not the intent that is lacking, but the information and awareness. And so we go into neighborhood to speak for trees. We hold canopy conversation. This is me during COVID, being invited by a community in College Park who wanted to talk about the canopy situation in their neighborhood. So I took it to them. We spread out in a backyard and we talked about strategies for their community. I'm going to talk about the 1 Million Trees Initiative, a partnership-based initiative in a little bit. And of course, right now we are in the middle of a rewriting City of Atlanta's tree protection ordinance. And that is another embodiment of many people in the community coming together to create a better policy for Atlanta. So I won't go into preaching to this choir. We know that trees are critical to Atlanta's urban ecology in all sorts of manners. And this is how we define how trees affect what our water issues, air issues, soil issues, and habitat issues. And habitat is not only just wildlife and pollinators, but we consider human beings being part of that nature, and it affects the way we live in this city. Briefly, there is a long list of the benefits of trees to our city. I won't go into each of these, but I hope that you know that one of the things that trees tend to do is it almost symbolizes intersectionality. There isn't an element that we probably don't talk about in any city dynamic or even community dynamic that trees don't play a part. So in a city that's called the City in the Forest, and this is a skyline view of our city, why would we even need an organization like Trees Atlanta? Why don't we have enough trees? Well, this is also Atlanta. Every day, development threatens our beautiful canopy. Currently, the City of Atlanta has about 47.1% canopy cover over our landmass. We're about 134 square miles in the city. And we can see by the trends that every passing year, our canopy is being lost. So what do we do about it? Part of it is education, like we are doing. Part of it is action, like we try to do with our partnerships. And part of it is policy. And as I mentioned, we try to affect policy through issues like the tree ordinance. Some of the dynamics that require us to partner across the board in multi-dimensions is that we live in an urban area. In the metropolitan Atlanta area, our population is projected to more than double to 8.6 million by 2050. In the City of Atlanta, we currently have about 500,000 people within the city footprint. By 2050, that will also grow to about $1.2 million, maybe it is all about dollars, but 1.2 million people. And the impact is it creates urban heat island hotspots throughout our cities. There's a great parallel from development and where urban heat island occurs. Not surprisingly, an overlay of where air pollution goes right on top of that. This overlap with what we know is happening on a global scale with climate change, doubled up with urban heat island effect, really increases the pressure and stresses in a city like Atlanta. This is why Trees Atlanta is focused in on how do we maintain and protect our canopy and take advantage of the resource that we have. So we talk about why do we do this? And this is a perfect place for us to tease out a term that we don't hear about frequently anymore, which is the triple bottom line. We know that we want to take care of the planet. We do it for the people, but there is a profit initiative. But those things can coexist, and when they meet, that's sustainability. So when sustainability is on the forefront, how do you get there? We do believe strongly, and we base our organization by doing this through partnership, collaboration in the community. This is fundamental to what Trees Atlanta does. The 1 Million Trees Initiative is a major initiative we started last year with 10 local cities and 10 nonprofit, and our goal and commitment is to plant and conserve 1 million trees in these partner cities in the next 10 years by 2030. Our partnerships expand through many local conservation organizations, community organizations, and of course the universities. All these universities either volunteer, do research with us, or are partners and collaborators in other ways. Now, I've covered a lot very fast, and I hope that we can talk about some of these topics in a little bit. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Judy. Our next speaker will be Deborah Scott from Georgia Stand Up. I have a question while Deborah is getting ready to the speakers. Can you see my text while you're speaking? Because I'm sending you a warning about the time. You can? Okay, great. Thank you. Deborah,
Well,
are you with us?
I am. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I apologize because I actually did not prepare slides, but let me
That's
just
okay.
share.
You didn't have to.
Okay. My name is Deborah Scott. I'm the executive director of Georgia Stand Up. Actually, I'm the CEO now of Georgia Stand Up. We have been around for about 16 years. And we have been doing a lot with partnerships over the last 16 years. But just to kind of level set where we are, Georgia Stand Up is a think and act tank for working communities. We have been a part of the fabric of Atlanta since I actually been in Atlanta for about 35 years, but the organization has been here for 16. We have a lot of partnerships, and we can't do what we do without our partnerships. But the core of our work is we do a lot of think and act tank research, which means our primary client, if you will, would be at-risk communities that are faced with displacement or faced with food insecurities or displacement or development is coming to their neighborhood and they don't know what to do. So we kind of fashion ourselves as a gas station for community groups, and particularly community leaders. We do a leadership development program that we've been doing for 16 years now. We've graduated over 400 leaders from our program. It's kind of like a leadership program that really marries their experience and what they're going through with some of the history of Atlanta, the history of race, class, and politics here in Atlanta, the history of why neighborhoods are divided the way that they are, the role of transit and transportation, the role of the economy in this region. We are statewide, but we are based here in the metro area. We do a lot of our work through partnerships and internships. We have had interns since the very beginning. We've had probably 250 to 300 interns over our 16 years. We have a heavy research and advocacy arm and have partnered with a number of the institutions that have been mentioned, but particularly Kennesaw State, Georgia Tech, University of Georgia, Atlanta University, Clark, Georgia State, Agnes Scott, Emory. A number of the instructors that we use from our Policy Institute come from the institutions, but then what we try to do is to give the students an experience that they probably would not have had had they not interned or worked with us, because we want them to talk directly to community members. So if they're working on an issue or studying an issue, we want them to talk directly. And I always use the proverbial Mrs. Johnson or Miss Jackson so that they can actually ground truth what they think with what these experts from the community actually know about their community. So if they're architect students, like with the work that we do with Dr. Mina, is we put those students directly in touch with the community members so that they actually hear from them of what their pain points are, what are some of their problems, what are some of the issues, and how the universities can actually help to solve some of these community problems. We are part of a network called the Transformational Alliance. We're one of the founders of that organization, which is a network of probably 60 organizations that are working on transit-oriented development. And so when we're looking at the impact of gentrification or the impact on expansion to some of these Southwest Atlanta neighborhoods or Southeast Atlanta neighborhoods, we're really talking to them about how we can create a win-win-win situation. So that's whether it's community benefits or whether it's working directly with the developers to make sure they're not displacing people in real time, whether it's negotiating about what kind of jobs need to be there. But really, we kind of see ourselves as a way, as an avenue for more progressive change in these communities. But that's just one of the things that we do. We also have been known for our voter registration and voter engagement work. You know, we're one of the organizations that have been very, very involved about voter disenfranchise and voter suppression. And so we attract a lot of students that really want to get involved in what's happening in the community. They see Georgia Stand Up as a trusted partner that they can partner with and intern with, or at least be exposed to what's happening in the community if they're not from Atlanta. So whether it's protesting or whether it's a conversation with the mayor or a conversation with these elected officials, we try to help foster those conversations. In turn, we also get developers that come to us and say they want their project to be better, and how can we help their project to serve the community. So we'll put the developers directly with the community to talk about how do you make this a win-win-win. In some cases, it might be a displacement situation, like in the Peoplestown area, where there's flooding that has happened over there, and the city really has moved towards eminent domain. And one of the things that we do is help to provide the research to make the case for the community as to whether they actually need to move or whether they don't. And we kind of facilitate that conversation between the city and those communities. In addition to our work with Stand Up, and Stand Up is a think and act tank, we do community organizing, civic engagement, civic education, our Policy Institute, leadership development, our leadership development program, and our internship program. A couple of years ago, in 2009, that's more than a couple of years ago, but 2009, we started a workforce development program called Trade Up, where we were looking at the jobs that were actually available in the community, but not necessarily available to those neighborhood folks. And we wanted to find out what it took to get people ready and skilled up for the development jobs that were coming, the construction jobs that were coming. So one of the research projects that we had students help us with is we actually talked to developers to ask them, what do they really need from community folks in order to work on these jobs? How do you make sure that you can actually hire them? And what we found was, there was in some cases classism, but in some cases it was just a misfire. The developers need this and they go through a process, but the community were finding out about jobs way too late and didn't know the training that they actually needed to do to prepare for the job. So we started a prep apprenticeship program where we trained them on soft skills, on understanding the way construction works. We gave them 3 certifications, OSHA 10, CPR, and first aid. And then we gave them a round robin experience where they got to go to a number of the different trade unions and had that hands-on experience, and then match those workers up with developers or with contractors or with apprenticeship programs. And then a few years ago, the mayor asked us to put together a program to help clean up and do some work in Vine City community. So we hired people from the community, 32 of them. We thought it was going to be about 17 weeks. It ended up to be about 32 to 34 weeks. It was almost a whole year. And they started cleaning up the neighborhood. They didn't need a special skill. They just had to have a working knowledge of basic safety skills, but really it gave them an experience that they will never forget, but more so, they got to clean up their own neighborhood. They got to learn how to clean up Proctor Creek, which I've heard was mentioned. They got to learn how to clean up creeks and to work with trash traps. And so that build-up program grew from cleaning up neighborhoods to doing deconstruction, to doing construction, to working on small projects. And then a few years ago, a couple of years ago, we started looking at the movie industry, and what we're trying to look at is where are the jobs that will not be imported from California or North Carolina that community can actually get. And we tracked those jobs to see what they would be, and started a training program to speak to the jobs that people can get with their current education. And so that program is called We Show Up. So we have stand up, trade up, build up, and We Show Up. And so one of the things I just like to share is really a thank you, because we're a small nonprofit. Some people think we're a pretty big nonprofit. We do have about 15 permanent staff. However, we also expand during election years. We have phone banking, voter registration, and canvassers in a nonpartisan way, because we want to make sure that people who have a voice that don't get a chance to experience using their voice actually get empowered to make their own decisions about what's happening in their neighborhood. So I think I'm over my time, but I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate and look forward to the questions a little later.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Our next speaker is JD Kim from Regeneration.
All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jongdae Kim, and I also go by JD. And I'm excited and honored to be here on this panel today. I am the co-founder and the executive director of Regeneration Movement. And we have a little more modest history, as we are a community-based organization, and we are going into our 4th year, but we still serve with a big heart. Our overarching mission is to empower the younger generations of global diasporas, including refugees and immigrants, as global citizens, so that they will be the regenerating force of this society with their unique and diverse identities. We carry out this mission in 3 parts. First is empowering youth through education, and second is creating space for conversations, and third is advocacy for peace. So today I will mostly focus on the first point and mainly about our talk mainly about our partnership with Emory University's Project Shine. So as I've said, part of what we do is we do education for youth, and we largely work in the Clarkson community. I'm sure many of you know what Clarkson, where Clarkson is, but it's where a lot of resettled refugees resettle in America. So about 50% of the populations are foreign-born in Clarkson. So there are many immigrant and refugee populations in Clarkson. So we work with high school students and provide SAT and ACT tutoring and college mentorship program, along with, we call it Global Leadership Academy. So we have been providing the service since January of 2018. And one of the crucial partnerships that we formed during our partnership with Project Shine at Emory University. Project Shine is a student volunteering organization that provides volunteers to many community-based organizations in Clarkston. Since fall of 2018, Project Shine has partnered with Regeneration Movement by sending tutors to our after-school tutoring program. Even with the pandemic, the transition of our service to the online space has been so smooth thanks to the Army of Project Shine volunteer support. In fact, we are actually able to expand our service to provide group mentorship on top of our regular tutoring sessions, because we were receiving more and more volunteers. And currently, we go by a cohort each semester, and we have about 20 to 25 students. We currently have about 15 to 20 mentors and tutors as volunteers through Project Shine. So the ratio has been almost a 1-to-1. So our students really have been enjoying the personalized coaching, care, and friendship with our volunteers. And we have also been very grateful for the commitment of our volunteers, because many of our volunteers through Project Shine would return to us and stay connected with us. And many of them actually have become our current paid staff members with official roles. Another great thing about our partnership with Project Shine at Emory is the opportunity for a larger network and chances for collaboration with other institutions. Many greater Atlanta universities, including like Emory University, Georgia Tech, Agnes Scott, and Atlanta Metropolitan State College, and Clarkson area community-based organizations have been approved for a grant last year, to run the global, we call it the Global Communities Internship Program, which is a program, which is a paid internship program where each university trains the students during the spring semester through their projects and curriculums and have them intern in Clarkston community-based organizations. So this is an example of an opportunity that wouldn't have been possible without our partnership with Project Shine at Emory University. So overall, our experience with the university partnership has been very invaluable. And I know I only have 5 minutes, so I'll stop here.
Thank you, JD. Our next speaker is Professor Michael Elliott from Georgia Tech.
Well, welcome. I'm going to share my screen and can you see the entire, is it showing correctly? Mina? Yes, okay. Thank you. What I'm going to be talking about today is a project
sorry,
that is...
Michael, actually it was showing better, but now we zoomed in a little bit. I don't know if that was what you wanted.
It's just showing a single slide, right?
I don't know if it's for everyone. Okay, now it's a single slide. Yes, sorry. Go ahead, please.
So what I'm going to talk about is a partnership between Georgia Tech and the Mahela Housing SIVA Trust, which is in India. And just to give you a background of Mahela Housing Trust, it is part of the SIVA organization. SIVA, Self-Employed Women's Association, goes back 70 years. About 25 years ago, this organization was concerned about the living conditions of the women employees that they worked with, which were mostly, as self-employed women, tended to be street vendors, tended to be people who worked in construction, other areas like that, textiles, in their homes, and they lived in informal settlements. For the last 25 years, they've been working on these housing issues, and about 5 years ago, they became increasingly concerned about the climate resilience of the women and their families in these informal settlements. It is at this point that the partnership with Georgia Tech started, and I'll explain more about that partnership a little bit later. But first, to give you a sense of what the project was, it involved India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, 7 different cities, about 100 different slums, and the focus was on the residents of these slums and informal settlements, particularly women who were, in fact, the most vulnerable, both economically, in terms of marginalization of their voice, but also in terms of climate stress. In this context, we were focusing on 4 climatic stress factors. Heat stress. We're in an area of the world that where temperatures can go up to as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and in buildings which many of which had either aluminum roofs or cement roofs that tended to act almost like ovens. So water stress, the access to water, issues of flooding and inundation during monsoons as the level of rains increased, and vector and waterborne diseases that were migrating because of climate change. And so we were going to focus on these 4 stressors that were very directly affecting the women who lived and their families who lived in these particular communities. The model for this is to build expertise and social capacity of the urban poor, particularly women. So this is completely based on partnerships. A small organization like MHT working in 100 different informal settlements rely heavily on the capacity of local community leaders and in fact build that capacity. The second part of this is technical experts and linking them in tandem with technical experts on climate change so that the women and the families could work in self-assessing climate risk in their own communities and build strategies that were evidence-based and to implement those strategies. So within that context, there was a notion of community-driven, women-led, technically competent, knowledge and resource, based on knowledge and resource partnerships. There's also a notion of scalable that while 100 different slums sounds like a large number. Yeah, it consisted of maybe 25,000 families out of 150 million people who live in these countries in these kinds of conditions. So whatever we were developing, we were trying to develop in that context. So within that, this just gives you a sense of some of the women that were involved in these kinds of projects, the conditions, the kind of living conditions that they're in. Behind that is the question of, well, how do we develop a partnership, and what is that partnership based on? So Mahela Housing Trust was very deeply embedded in informal settlement communities. They had had 20 years of experience working in these communities in a particular city, Ahmedabad. So the project that was being envisioned was one in which they would expand to a number of other cities, but take that experience with them about how one works in these kinds of communities. The working model is based on decades of experience around housing and infrastructure improvements within these cities. They were aware of climate change impacts because they could see these impacts in their communities, but they had no expertise or capacity to think about urban-based climate impacts. And they needed additional resources. So the desire to obtain external funding required that they think much more systematically about how they were going to be doing these interventions. So what we brought, and I might note that MHT had a number of different partnerships. Only two of those were with the universities, but there were also research institutions that were embedded in India around climate change and around public health. And the other organizations that in fact would provide technical assistance and technical support. So Georgia Tech is just one of those partners. What did Georgia Tech bring to this? Well, first of all, we're embedded in kind of knowledge-based communities. And so our understanding of climate change and some of the other issues they were facing was significant. We had experience in research and evaluation. So for instance, helping them write the proposals, the initial proposals, that got them into partnerships with the Rockefeller Foundation and with the US aid and with the Swedish and international development agencies, making those connections and helping to bridge those connections. And then helping them in terms of thinking through collaborative partnerships with other partners. And then once, in fact, these proposals were in fact funded, working with them over a 5-year period to date around how one develops a learning organization. So using evaluation, not just to meet the funders' needs, but also to build the capacity of the organization to take on projects like this and to think through the problems that they were running into in trying to implement the scale of project and reflecting on it in their own practice. So that's the relationship between MHT and Georgia Tech. It also took on the Georgia Tech's part and the sort of the desire to work collaboratively with social justice organizations, that it starts with the needs of the organizations themselves and helping them, in fact, implement and think through the problems as they see them and providing some feedback to that. So thank you very much. And I'm sure we can talk more about this a little bit later.
Thank you, Michael. This was great. We actually saw different kinds of organizations doing all kinds of different work with different partners, universities, and we saw universities working on different really distinct issues with the organization. So within this regional centers of expertise group, we have a community of practice group that aims in developing relationship with community partners. And we have Erin Lebow-Skilly with us. Erin, can we hear a little bit about your activities and goals and your maybe projects?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I wasn't fully prepared today. I'm kind of jumping in for one of my other partners in crime, Ruthie Yao. But I can briefly chat with you all about what we are up to or have been up to within the RCE. So I guess as we've heard today, partnerships are very essential for addressing the SDGs, and we're focused on kind of one type of partnership in particular, and that's the partnership between local community-based organizations and universities and other higher ed institutions within the Atlanta area. So there's a lot of both of those within the RCE. So it just kind of, we identified the need and created the group around that. And our main goals are really to improve the coordination between the two types of organizations. And I think especially among the universities who are all partnering with different local organizations, but maybe not coordinating amongst ourselves. I should say, sorry, I represent Emory University. I put it in the chat earlier with an environmental health research center there. So I'm coming from the university perspective. And then also I'm sorry, I'm trying to off the top of my head remember our primary goals. So kind of improving our coordination, especially among the universities, identifying and making more accessible the resources that we all have to offer. And also, again, especially for the universities, really learning how to be a better partner to our local community organizations, kind of looking at best practices and other things like that, looking for models of community engagement. We're a relatively new group. We especially welcome representatives from community-based organizations to join us to help in this conversation. Actually, I haven't even sent this email out to the group, but we will be having our next meeting on May 10th. And I am going to put my email in the chat. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, I can make sure that they are added to our list and included in those conversations. Thanks, Shebnam, for putting that in the chat. And I'll also drop, again, I dropped it in the chat earlier, but I'll do it again, the link on the RCE website to our groups. You can read a little bit more in detail and in an organized manner, other than my rambling thoughts about what we're about. So yeah, we would welcome any of you because you're all kind of doing this similar work. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Erin, for joining us. It's wonderful that we have that support group for the work that everyone is doing within the RCE group. I would like to ask all the panelists to reflect on the initial phase or how you established your partnerships. I know some of you already mentioned, but for those who have not talked about it, I mean, how did you come to set these relationships? What are the important channels or platforms that brought you together with the university, or for Michael with the organizations together, so you could actually establish these connections and start your projects? And I'll actually let anyone who would like to go just start talking.
So this is Deborah. I'll just jump right in. When we first started with our partnerships with the universities, it was really because we didn't have the capacity to hire research staff. And one of our colleagues were part of a national network called Partnership for Working Families. And on a call, I just gave my pain point that I don't have enough resources. And they said, well, start with the universities and ask that if they will help you with some of the research. And so one of our first formal partnerships was with Georgia Tech and Michael Dobbins, who was a former colleague of mine when I worked for the city of Atlanta. And I just, called him up and said, we need to start working together. And we've been working together ever since. So that led to other partnerships related to our Policy Institute. We needed instructors for our Policy Institute, and again, reached out to professors that I knew or relationships I already had, and just started working together. And then over time, of course, other relationships formed. For Kennesaw State, Dr. Mina, we were a part of the Transformational Alliance. It was, a no-brainer for us to work together on a project that she was working on, and that's been now several years. So in each case, either the university needed information or connection to the community. And in our case, we needed to support what we knew that what was happening in community, but we wanted to make sure the research that the universities and the students provide kind of backed up what we knew the community was expressing.
Great, thank you, Deborah. Anyone else wants to
On
chime
what
in?
Deborah also said, you know, a lot of time our relationships with the university is sometimes very simple. First, you know, students make a great volunteer base. They're energetic, they have wide interests, and they help us expand our reach. I mean, it's such a special way for people from geographic and interest areas to come together at a project, and then they take it elsewhere and spread the word. But I think one of the things is that in our relationships with academic partners in particular, we found that where the magic happens is that when we provide a practical or hands-on application of some of the study areas. For example, with Emory, we partnered several years ago with Professor Brosi, and they did a pollinator study. We were able to give them access to the Atlanta Beltline Arboretum, which we manage. So we did a long-term study with them. The same thing goes with Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is a wealth of resources. One of the satellite imagery that I showed you with the canopy study was done in partnership with Professor Tony Giarrusso and his department. And of course, one of our best collaborators is Professor Brian Stone in his classes, because they're doing a lot of interesting studies regarding urban heat island effect. And that seems to touch upon so many other social issues that we have in the city like Atlanta or anywhere else. So it's nice to be able to put into practice what these academic researchers are doing, and the reverse also, just like Deborah said, sometimes we need expertise in something and we put the word out, and usually there's a partner who's able to fulfill that.
Great, thank you, Judy.
I can
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll quickly add, just like Judy, for us, a lot of them started with the students, right? And so I said we have a pretty big internship program. And so just being transparent, a lot of the work that we do, especially when we're talking to underserved and underrepresented youth and young adults, they simply just didn't know about the opportunities that existed in conservation. It wasn't that they were interested, they just didn't know about them or had access to them. So in those conversations, it kind of started another conversation, which started another conversation, which we were able to talk to different department heads, to different career services or deans, whatever that looked like. And so being able to really create those transformational relationships, not necessarily transactional relationships, and folks knowing that we're there for the long term, not just for a semester or for one program or one project. Like, as Judy's able to give you names, it's because she's really working with these people, right? And it's really important and it's meaningful work. And so showing that we're an organization, we're a team, we're a staff that's inviting, and that we want the partnership, we need the partnership. As Deborah said, it helps with capacity in itself. And so doing that and creating those relationships and facilitating those type of projects has really helped us to kind of keep the conversation going and start working with different departments across the campus.
Great, thank you, Ebony.
So my connection with MHT is probably a little bit less obvious because I'm in the United States and MHT is in India. I was teaching in India in this CEPT, which is a university over there that focuses on environment planning and technology. While there, was meeting with community members to understand the situations that they faced. I mean, largely out of curiosity at that time, and just started working with MHT around the set of ideas that they were developing, just helping them think those things through. And then you know, obviously the connection to university is even once that partnership was established, the relationships were largely with CEPT University and other universities in Ahmedabad. And my role there was training the students who came onto it. I mean, they don't have the skills to sort of think through what it means to be in partnership with an organization like that, how to bring research skills that are useful for the kinds of questions that the organization was facing. So it evolved over time, not so much as me as a bridge to Georgia Tech, bringing students over given the distance, but rather between me and students that were more local that were involved in some of the research that we were doing and needed to be trained on how to do it well.
Wonderful, and great to hear about the global partnerships as well, because a lot of the things that we talked here are about the local partnership. So it was nice to see also a global partnership and how it was developed. Was there anyone else who wanted to respond? I think we heard almost from everyone, maybe except Jangdae.
Okay, yeah, might as well, right? So I think yeah, as we were beginning our program, I also did a lot of kind of like probing around, but like especially with Project Shine, it's I actually worked as an staff at Emory for about 6 years, so I've been an undergrad and graduate student at Emory, so I'm very well connected with the Emory. And I knew of this, that I knew of Project Shine before, and I knew of their mission and their work they do. And when we were beginning this work, we thought like our work aligned so well with Project Shine, and it will be a great resource for us as well. So I reached out, and it really worked out well. That's how I got connected with Project Shine. And there are other important partners that we partner with, and one of them is IRC, the International Rescue Committee. Is a larger NGO that resettles refugees that come into America. And with their Atlanta office, every summer we put together SAT and college prep summer camp. And how we got connected with IRC was there was a network called Atlanta Refugee Youth Network, where there are a lot of community-based organizations would gather regularly. So when we were beginning our work, we also got connected with the network, and in that network we met with the youth coordinator at IRC, and that's kind of like how our relationship with IRC began. And there have been kind of like random emails through the website as well, and that has actually also been really great, because there is a company called Initial View, which offers kind of college interview solutions. Even before COVID, it offering its services, offering online interview services. And they reached out to us because while they're doing profit work, they also wanted to do more work with community-based organizations to give back to the community. So they reached out to us, and actually that connection has been really, we've also been grateful for the connection, because I think one connection leads to another, and we are hearing a lot of that example. But through our connection with Initial View, we also got connected with this Coalition for College Access, which gave us exposure to many different universities. So we've been connected that way. We've been connected with other university admissions officers, and yeah, it's been really, that's kind of like how we've been forming partnerships.
Wonderful. So it seems like the students are a great connection between the communities, community organizations and the universities. And then I think that, the faculty's connections and, various work in different environments also seems to help. One thing that I wanted to add to Aaron's notes in terms of the community of practice in the RC is that they're working on creating kind of an inventory in terms of expertise within all the RC universities. As you know, this regional centers of expertise connected to United Nations is trying to create development and projects and progress around the sustainable development goals in collaboration with the local organizations, governments, so on and so forth. So hopefully pretty soon we might actually have that inventory published on their website, and it's going to be like a click away to go and see what expertise lies in what university and with what departments and faculty. I think it was great to see how different strategies or ways of establishing partnerships. I'd also like to hear, and it's also a question coming from the audience as well, how, what strategies or what, just to take a lesson and make a note of, what didn't really work? Like when you're trying to establish these, relationships or doing such collaborative projects, what really didn't work, or what we should actually avoid as a lesson to take?
So I'll jump in on that. One of the first things when we started our Policy Institute, we had it at academic institutions, and we thought that that was going to be good, that it would ground the community and give them the opportunity to go to universities. But what we found is, and we started, I think, at Georgia State, and then we moved it to Morehouse, we moved it to Spelman, we moved it back to Georgia State. And again, this is over a 15-year period. But what we found is that it actually gave the community more anxiety coming to the university versus us doing it at a neutral place and bringing the institution to them. And so that was the aha moment, because it was, oh, well, they get to go to college. No, they didn't. The parking, the navigating your way on campus, trying to find the room. It just, by the time that they got there, they were stressed out. So when we just started having it at a neutral place, at our office, in our auditorium, we got much better feedback about the experience because of the lack of anxiety. So that was one of the first things. The other thing is, what we've learned is teaching students how to work directly with the community is essential. So one of the first projects we worked with Dr. Dobbins is we really had to teach the students how to listen to the community and just not give them what they think the answer is. So that looks like, Mrs. Johnson says there's a problem in my neighborhood, and let's just take food access. She's describing that, we can't go to the grocery store in our neighborhood, that, the food trucks don't come, all of these things. And normally a student will just jump right in and say, well, this is what they need. They're in a food desert and they need this, this, and that. And so what we try to do is to get them to, to just rest in that. Listen to what she has to say. Most of the time, community members want to and need to be heard. So listen to them and then say, okay, well, let's look at some solutions for you, and then come back with those solutions versus spouting out the answer that they think from their experience, because oftentimes, because of the age difference, sometimes they don't have the actual experience. They're just going based on what someone told them or read. But teaching youth how to work with community, I think, has been essential to our success in terms of these partnerships.
Wonderful comment, Deborah. That is exactly as a professor that I've been dealing with the students when we work with the community. They're so eager to apply the knowledge that they gathered. They sometimes, miss the hearing, and then, that data collection and analysis and synthesis part. So, great comment. Thank you. Anyone else want to share their experience?
Those are great comments. And just to build on what she said and then add another is that, I appreciated what you said about the intimidation about going to a university. And I think what we're also able to do, actually, and I guess all of us do it, is we provide a place to kind of softly land within a community. We have a lot of academic relationships that use our relationships and our platform to communicate what they're studying and researching outside of the university. They have students who will listen, but the community sometimes is more engaged and interested in hearing what's happening within those institutions. So that's kind of a nice relationship to have. The other thing is, when we're talking about, and Ebony kind of inferred to it, sometimes it is transactional when these partnerships, sometimes it's with students and with projects, and they're very focused in on getting a grade or doing a project or whatever it is. And so sometimes it is, I have to admit, it's a struggle and almost a too heavy of a burden to lift for a lot of nonprofit organizations. We have so many students in classes coming to us wanting to help and wanting to apply their academic knowledge, but it actually ends up being a tremendous burden on us. And although the intention is to lift everyone up, we try to figure out how can we really transform this into something that's applicable to our organization and the communities that we're trying to apply, and not purely for an academic or conceptual project. And so I would love to hear how other organizations deal with it, but we have to gently decline a lot of these offers and also guide these projects into a way that it's serving our community and our organization, and not so much us spending a lot of time so that they can get a grade. So that's a sensitive area for us. So, and then, you normally do need somebody who's committed within the institution to provide that long-term relationship, because the students are always going to be turning over. But like, Ebony's nodding, so she's probably had this experience with universities. And we're lucky, we do have good relationships at, all the local universities, and usually it's 1 or 2 sponsors who have stuck by us for 6, 10 years, who provide that continuity. And that's what makes that relationship work. And without that, it can be a burden. I know that people think that if volunteers come and students come with their energy, it's all good, but it's a two-sided coin on that.
If I could speak to a point too, Judy, that you were making, but it's time. And so, I partner with Georgia State, for example, with their MSW program. I'm a field supervisor. And so with them, it's dedicated. You have to commit at least 1 hour of supervision to every student that you have, and kind of that ongoing work across the school year. But you have to also commit a lot of time in these partnerships and programs. And so when you talk about the small nonprofits, a small team, a small staff, that's where the burden can come, because if you don't commit that time, you see it on the back end. And so just making time and space and place, and making sure that you have the capacity to even engage in that project the way that you need it to be, and for the results that you want at the end to come out, is really, really important. And so that's something that we don't always think about, right? So like, I have 4 MSW interns. That's 4 hours out of my week that I have to dedicate to those students. And I don't want to shortchange them. So the same thing when we're working with different classes, like, you have to be ready to respond to different meeting invites and emails, and they're trying to be mindful of your time too, and they have finals and things like that. So they try to compact it all, but it may take some time getting all that information back to them. So just being aware and mindful of that.
Thanks, Ebony. And I think it's also, touching on the audience question about how can we improve the likelihood of two-way partnership, that, we actually create these partnerships with procedures that are, not pressuring the community partners in terms of time and effort. And it seems like there seems to be some kind of from the community organizations, it seems like there needs to be a kind of a filter or structure in place to see which projects you can actually handle and say yes or no, it seems. Anyone else who wanted to talk about these issues?
I'll add that, particularly since we were working with communities that were very low income, even though they're quite visible in the communities, they're not like in the US where they're in different parts of the city, but they're actually spread throughout cities and therefore quite visible. The students largely had no experience entering into communities with this level of poverty, or how to engage. So there were 2 sets of issues. One is we were actually using them as researchers, as interviewers, and so it's about training them, building their capacity, but it's also building their sensitivity. Not just several people mentioned listening, but it's also just what does it mean to be respectful in a particular situation, and how do you keep yourself feeling comfortable in that situation so that your own anxieties don't become part of what's going on. And I think that is a responsibility of the university that's working, in part, in partnership with MHT. Certainly the issues of entering the community have to be taught by MHT, but you organize how to do that, and within a kind of explicit notion of training. So I think the model there was less one of just volunteers and much more of a longer term relationships between people who came in and committed to working for a semester by doing interviewing and other kinds of things.
Thank you, Michael. I think, Shebnam, I might actually see a project coming for the RC's community of practice. Maybe that's a training that we wanted to include for the universities to have the students go through before the similar partnerships. So that was my alarm telling me that I need to give the platform to Henry, so he could actually give us his remarks on the overall panel discussions. You're muted, Henry. So if you can unmute yourself, we can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Now we hear you.
I'm live now.
Great.
Okay. Thanks. It was interesting to hear a lot of observations and comments and interesting projects. Since I've been involved in community-based projects for about 60 years in the United States, Africa, Brazil, Australia, England, Japan, a lot of the observations that many of you have made, certainly coming from nonprofits, I've heard many times before. And I think what's particularly unique and why many of the nonprofits are more successful in the United States than most other countries in the world is because we're basically a volunteer society. When governments ran out of money in Australia, New Zealand, and England, the governments couldn't provide the kinds of basic amenities that were necessary for these towns and these countries to survive. And what they had to do is develop a culture of volunteerism, because it's only through volunteerism that many of these issues can happen. My concern is that volunteerism is really not a strategy. My interest and what I've been teaching students over 40 years in North Carolina is community-based learning. Students need to be prepared. One of the difficulty with volunteers, and I think it was Deborah who mentioned it, and certainly Michael, the language that designers and planners use is not the language that community people use. And the difficulty with volunteers, and to some extent students, is that everybody loves students. If they were professionals, they wouldn't have that kind of love from the community. But the difficulty is that students, whether it's in the social sciences, whether it's design or planning, learn how to communicate with other people that speak the same language. Which means that when you work in the community, not only do you have to listen, but you have to have a toolbox. Not unlike a toolbox that a plumber or an electrician has. The tools don't tell you how to solve the problem. The tools provide a way of addressing the issue. And what's not happening in the university, and although it has over the last 40, 50 years from time to time, is that there's no preparation and no real focus on the concept that I've called as kind of a social activist approach. Part of the work that I've done in the university is basically in the order of community development, and it's within a school of architecture. And before any student goes out into a community, I do a boot camp, which is training various kinds of techniques of how to work with small groups, how to focus on consensus decision-making, how to avoid voting. I mean, there's an enormous literature on small groups that students need to know before they go out into a community. And in the 35 years that I've been teaching community development studios, we've done over 250 projects. And one of the basic premises of the education program is that all students are different. It's like Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence, which means that students have to be able to identify areas of interest, select projects of interest, and never work more than 2 or 3 students in any one project. So they learn project management. And consequently, the aim is not necessarily to prepare students to be like me, but to prepare students to be better functioning professionals no matter what field they're in. Learning how to listen is a skill. It doesn't come naturally. Now, I've got 63 years of experience of learning how to listen, and that's how long I've been married. Now, my wife says that it's really selective listening. Okay, I'll buy that. But if 2 people can't get along, learn to share, learn to compromise, then how on earth are large groups going to be able to function? So, I mean, when I read Mina's statements, I thought there was going to be a discussion about, a specific discussion about how the university has to change to be able to work effectively with nonprofits. And I think Michael was the only one that really talked about some of the most interesting issues, but of course that's India. Now, I've worked in rural Georgia. I've done projects in Americas with Koinonia, and it's not very different than India. And I've been to a lot of rural America, in Alabama, and you'd think you're in the 1940s. So the issues, I think, partially are the urban focus further disenfranchises the whole concept of rural development. Rural people are ignored. And we see that every time there's an election. So I think the urban focus, I think, is okay, but universities need to expand way beyond the urban focus and begin to think of small towns and rural development, because that's where the problems are extremely serious. So I know nonprofits typically need to rely on volunteerism. And what's been happening, certainly in many universities around the country, is the resurgence of the concept of service learning. Now, service learning emerged back in the 60s. The idea was to, and most of these new ideas tend to be politically motivated. And land grant and public universities supported by legislators who in many states used to be farmers and growers. They were always questioning how much time university people spend teaching. And consequently, what was necessary was to develop strategies to show legislators, local political leaders, that the university is not aloof. And so in the 60s, they developed the concept of service learning, where students would work as interns in public agencies throughout the state. It was an absolute disaster. Interns basically are not very effective, partially because the timing of when an intern goes into an agency and that person's ability to contribute or really understand what was happening is quite limited. In the 70s, we went through community design centers where students from architecture schools would open storefront offices in urban areas and basically demonstrate to stop political action, to stop local housing authorities from tearing down housing and building new housing for upper income people. There was a period called Black Removal. Universities withdrew because they didn't want students to be involved in political action. It would reflect on the university. Now, there are people throughout the United States in 150 universities in architecture, landscape architecture, and planning who are still involved in community action and community projects. And the way in which that is addressed by the university system is called service learning today. So many campuses around the United States have programs called service learning, teaching listening skills, various communication skills, doing evaluations of students prior to involvement in community service and after, to demonstrate the impact of community service for students. But it's on an organized way. It's not volunteers. Faculty primarily are trained in how to work in communities. Faculty and then train their students in how to work effectively in communities. And what we saw in the 60s and 70s in community design centers has now become legitimized in universities, and in many cases it's called service learning. So I was hoping there would be more people from the university, because this is really where the change has to occur, and it's not. There has been a movement around the world called co-production, where typically research in the university would guide what's happening in a community. And now with projects like you are involved in, with partnerships with university students and faculty, there's the belief that this represents a new form of research that's more powerful and more effective than the traditional research going on in universities. But it can't be through student volunteers. It has to be some kind of organized program coming out of the university, so that not only university students who are trained in community outreach, but they can also train people in nonprofits and some of the most effective techniques. Because from what I've heard many of you speak about, it's kind of trial and error, learning by discovery.
Oh, it's 4:30.
Now, I could have predicted many of these kinds of situations that people have spoken about. So that kind of experience needs to come from faculty in the university who have a good experience working in communities and train their students in effective community participation, so that nonprofits, not only nonprofits, in many instances in communities there are neighborhood groups that are not organized but have very significant issues that need to be addressed. So nonprofits is only one small dimension of a community interaction. Thank you very much for presenting your work. I wish I was in Atlanta.
Henry.
I wish I was in Atlanta with you, but you know, North Carolina is not so bad. Thanks, Mina.
Well, thank you so much, Henry. Henry is a professor of emeritus at North Carolina State University's College of Design. And as he mentioned, he's done a lot of community participation projects, and he has numerous books on the issues. So thank you so much, Henry, and thank you so much, everyone, to join this panel. I mean, within this short amount of time, I learned a lot. We actually got some projects for the RCU groups, even the universities. And I think we will have the next session in 10 minutes. So we will conclude our session here, but I would like you, the panelists, especially the community organizations, to look at the chat, because some people are asking about internships. Shebnam said that she will actually have the chat discussion printed and send it to the attendees so that you can have the information of the panelists as well as the people who joined. Because we actually asked them to write their names and organizations, so we could actually use this panel as an opportunity to connect nonprofits to the university. So I see actually the chat being filled in. So even though I would like to close the panel right now, I think the chat will be up for a couple of minutes. Well, does that sound good, Shebnam?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mina, and thanks everyone. This has been a really interesting, fascinating conversation, and there are so many opportunities to stay connected, especially through our CE and the community of practice. And yes, I am saving the chat and will be sharing it with everyone. So thank you so much. And if you can, please join us for the next session and other symposium panels that are coming up this afternoon, and we are continuing tomorrow and Friday as well. Thank you so much.